They had enough weapons to destroy the entire world in less than 1 hour, enough firepower to erase every major city, every government, and most human life. And yet, somehow, nobody ever fired the first shot. Before we go any further, tell me something real. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it for you? And if you want more true history, explained simply and honestly, make sure you like the video, share it, and subscribe. Because this story matters more than almost any other story humans have lived through. For nearly 45 years, the world existed in a permanent state of fear. Two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, stood face to face, fully prepared for a war that would not just kill soldiers or destroy cities, but could end civilization itself. This period was called the Cold War, and even though there were no direct battles between these two giants, it was not peaceful, calm, or safe. It was a long, quiet standoff where disaster was always one mistake away. When World War II ended in 1945, much of the world lay in ruins. Entire cities across Europe and Asia were destroyed, economies were shattered, and tens of millions of people were dead. Out of this destruction, two nations emerged, stronger than all the rest. The United States had enormous industrial power and a new global influence, while the Soviet Union had the largest army on Earth and deep control over Eastern Europe. At first, they were allies who had fought a common enemy, but once that enemy was gone, their alliance collapsed almost immediately. The reason was simple but dangerous. The two sides believed in completely different systems. The United States believed in democracy, private property, and capitalism. The Soviet Union believed in communism, state control, and one-party rule. Each side was convinced that if the other spread its system across the world, their own society would eventually disappear. This fear did not stay on paper or in speeches. It shaped every military plan, every political decision, and every weapon they built. Then came the invention that changed war forever. In August 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In seconds, entire cities were wiped out. The message to the world was clear: a single weapon could now destroy what once required thousands of planes and soldiers. The Soviet Union understood this immediately and rushed to develop its own nuclear bomb. By 1949, it succeeded, and from that moment on, the world entered the most dangerous era in its history. Once both sides had nuclear weapons, they did not slow down or stop. They accelerated. They built larger bombs, faster missiles, long-range bombers, and nuclear submarines that could hide beneath the oceans for months at a time. Over the years, both sides collected thousands of nuclear weapons, not to win wars, but to make sure the other side would never dare to attack first. Humanity had created weapons so powerful that using them meant everyone would lose. This created a terrifying reality. If the United States launched nuclear weapons at the Soviet Union would respond immediately. If the Soviet Union launched first, the United States would do the same. Within minutes, millions of people would be dead, and within hours, the world would be permanently changed. This idea became known as mutually assured destruction, a phrase that sounds technical but means something very simple. If I destroy you, I also destroy myself. Victory no longer existed, only survival or extinction. What makes this even more frightening is that these weapons were not safely locked away. They were kept ready at all times. Nuclear missiles sat underground in silos, fueled and aimed. Submarines carrying nuclear weapons patrolled the oceans silently. Bombers flew with nuclear bombs already on board. In many cases, launch decisions had to be made in less than 10 minutes. Leaders did not have hours to think. They had moments, and during those decades, mistakes happened again and again. Radar systems detected missiles that were never there. Military exercises were mistaken for real attacks. Planes crossed borders by accident. Computers gave false warnings. More than once, the world stood just minutes away from nuclear war, not because someone wanted it, but because fear, technology, and human error pushed events toward disaster. This is why the Cold War is so hard to understand. It did not stay cold because the world was stable or safe. It stayed cold because people hesitated, questioned orders, and feared what would happen if they acted too fast. The systems designed to protect nations were often the same systems that almost destroyed them. So the real question becomes unavoidable. If the danger was this constant, if the weapons were always ready, and if mistakes kept happening, why did the Cold War never explode into a full, hot war? The answer is not simple, and it is not comforting. Because when you understand it, you realize how fragile survival really was, and how close humanity came to ending itself without ever meaning to. The Cold War did not stay cold because the world was peaceful or because leaders trusted one another. It stayed cold because everyone slowly realized a terrifying truth. The first shot would also be the last. As nuclear weapons spread and became more powerful, the idea of winning a war completely disappeared. War was no longer about soldiers on battlefields or tanks crossing borders. It was about cities vanishing in minutes and millions of ordinary people dying without warning. This understanding did not come all at once. It was learned through fear, close calls, and moments when the world almost slipped out of human control. One of the biggest reasons the Cold War never turned hot was something very uncomfortable to accept. Fear worked better than courage. Leaders on both sides were afraid, not just of losing power, but of being remembered as the people who ended the world. No president or general wanted their name to become the final chapter of human history. Even the most aggressive leaders understood that nuclear war would not make them heroes. It would make them the villains of all time, blamed forever for destroying civilization. This fear slowly changed how decisions were made. During World War II, leaders often acted quickly and aggressively because the worst outcome was defeat. During the Cold War, the worst outcome was extinction. That difference forced caution. It forced hesitation. It forced leaders to stop, think, and sometimes do nothing, even when their instincts told them to respond with force. Doing nothing, for once, became the safest option. Another major reason the Cold War never turned hot was that both sides created unwritten rules. These rules were never officially signed or announced, but they were understood. Certain actions were considered too dangerous. For example, the United States and the Soviet Union avoided directly attacking each other's homeland. They avoided killing each other's top leaders. They avoided direct military clashes between their main armies. When fighting did happen, it happened indirectly in other countries, through what became known as proxy wars. Proxy wars allowed both sides to compete without triggering nuclear war. Instead of US and Soviet soldiers fighting each other directly, they supported opposite sides in conflicts in places like Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan. These wars were brutal and deadly, and millions of people suffered because of them. But from the perspective of the superpowers, proxy wars were a way to release pressure without crossing the nuclear line. As cruel as it sounds, these conflicts helped prevent a much larger disaster. Communication also played a critical role. Early in the Cold War, leaders realized that misunderstandings were extremely dangerous. During crises, slow communication could mean disaster. This became painfully clear during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, when the world came closer to nuclear war than at any other time. Messages between Washington and Moscow took hours to deliver. Each delay increased the risk of panic and wrong decisions. After this crisis, both sides learned an important lesson. Silence was deadly. As a result, they created direct communication lines, including the famous hotline between the White House and the Kremlin. This did not mean they trusted each other. It meant they wanted to avoid misunderstandings. Being able to quickly explain intentions, calm fears, or ask questions reduced the risk of accidental war. Sometimes a simple message, saying "this is a drill" or "this was a mistake," was enough to stop escalation. Another reason nuclear war did not happen was that humans, not machines, still made the final decisions. This may sound obvious, but it is extremely important. As technology advanced, warning systems became faster and more automated. Computers monitored radar screens. Satellites scanned the Earth. Alarms were designed to alert leaders within seconds of a possible attack. These systems were powerful, but they were not perfect. There were moments when machines reported incoming nuclear missiles that did not exist. In those moments, human judgment mattered more than rules or protocols. Some officers questioned the data, some hesitated. Some chose to wait, instead of immediately reporting an attack. These decisions were not guaranteed by any system. They depended on individuals who trusted their instincts more than machines. Humanity survived the Cold War not because technology was flawless, but because humans sometimes refused to blindly follow it. Training and education also changed over time. As the Cold War continued, military and political leaders became more aware of the true consequences of nuclear war. War games and simulations showed horrifying outcomes. Studies predicted nuclear winter, global famine, and the collapse of ecosystems. The idea that nuclear war could be limited or controlled became harder to believe. Leaders began to understand that once nuclear weapons were used, events would quickly spiral out of control. This growing understanding influenced arms control agreements. Treaties were signed to limit the number of weapons, reduce testing, and control where missiles could be placed. These agreements did not end the arms race, but they slowed it. They created rules and inspections. They built small amounts of trust in a world full of suspicion. Most importantly, they reduced the chances of sudden surprise attacks, which were one of the biggest triggers for panic and escalation. Public fear also mattered. Ordinary people lived with the constant threat of nuclear war. Children practiced nuclear drills in schools. Families built fallout shelters. Movies, books, and news reports constantly reminded people that the world could end at any moment. This fear influenced politics. Leaders knew that their citizens did not want nuclear war. Even during moments of extreme tension, public opinion acted as a quiet force pushing against total destruction. Another often overlooked reason the Cold War stayed cold was time. As years passed without nuclear war, leaders grew older and new generations came into power. Many of them had lived through World War II or grown up hearing about its horrors. They did not want to repeat that experience on an even larger scale. Time allowed lessons to sink in. It allowed fear to mature into restraint. It allowed caution to replace reckless confidence. The Cold War also showed that power had limits. Despite having enormous military strength, both sides learned that they could not control everything. Smaller nations did not always obey. Revolutions happened. Allies sometimes acted independently. This unpredictability made nuclear war even riskier. If events could not be fully controlled, launching a nuclear attack became even more dangerous because no one could predict what would happen next. Ironically, the very size of nuclear arsenals contributed to restraint. When both sides had only a few nuclear weapons, the temptation to use them might have been greater. But once both sides had thousands, the idea of survival after war became impossible. Total destruction was guaranteed. This made nuclear weapons more useful as threats than as actual tools of war. Their value came from never being used. Yet, it is important to understand that none of this meant the world was safe. The Cold War did not avoid disaster because it was well designed. It avoided disaster because it was terrifying. It was held together by fear, hesitation, and fragile decisions made under extreme pressure. At many points, humanity survived not because of strong systems, but because of luck. As the Cold War slowly came to an end, tensions eased. The Soviet Union collapsed. Nuclear arsenals were reduced. Many people believed the danger had passed. But the lessons of the Cold War remain critical today. Nuclear weapons still exist. Warning systems still operate. Human error is still possible. The same forces that almost ended the world once are still present. The Cold War never turned hot, not because humans became wiser overnight, but because they were forced to confront the reality of extinction. Fear taught restraint. Mistakes taught caution. Survival taught humility. The world did not escape nuclear war because it deserved to. It escaped because, again and again, people chose not to push the final button, and that is the most important lesson of all. The Cold War shows that humanity's greatest danger is not hatred alone, but speed, pride, and blind obedience. It also shows that humanity's greatest protection is hesitation, communication, and the courage to stop when everything is pushing you forward. If this story taught you something new, if it made you realize how fragile survival really is, then make sure you like the video, share it with others, and subscribe, because the systems that almost ended the world once still exist today. And understanding them may be the difference between repeating history and surviving it again.